Verses 19 to 25. The prudent endeavor of the princes to pacify the discontented congregation, and to accommodate the matter, herein all the princes concurred and were unanimous, which doubtless disposed the people to acquiesce. They resolved to spare the lives of the Gibeonites, for so they had expressly sworn to do, v. 15, to let them live. 1. The oath was lawful, else it had not bound them any more than Herod's oath bound him to cut off John Baptist's head. It is true God had appointed them to destroy all the Canaanites, but the law must be construed, in favorum vitae with some tender allowance, to mean those only that stood it out and would not surrender their country to them, and not to bind them so far to put off the sense of honor and humanity as to slay those who had never lifted up a hand against them nor ever would, but, before they were reduced to any extremity, or ever attempted any act of hostility, with one consent humbled themselves. The kings of Israel were certainly more merciful kings than to do so, 1 Key 20:31, and the God of Israel a more merciful God than to order it so. Satis est prost Rasilione, it is enough to have laid the lion prostrate. And besides, the reason of the law is the law. The mischief designed to be prevented by that law was the infecting of the Israelites with their idolatry, do. 7:4. But if the Gibeonites renounce their idolatry, and become friends and servants to the house of God, the danger is effectually prevented, the reason of the law ceases, and consequently the obligation of it, especially to a thing of this nature. The conversion of sinners shall prevent their ruin. 2. The oath being lawful, both the princes and the people for whom they transacted were bound by it, bound in conscience, bound in honor to the God of Israel, by whom they had sworn, and whose name would have been blasphemed by the Canaanites if they had violated this oath. They speak as those that feared an oath, Ecl 9:2, when they argued thus, we will let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath which we swore, v. 20. He that ratifies a promise with an oath imprecates the divine vengeance if he willfully break his promise, and has reason to expect that divine justice will take him at his word. God is not mocked, and therefore oaths are not to be jested with. The princes would keep their word. 1. Though they lost by it. A citizen of Zion swears to his own hurt and changes not, PS 15:4. Joshua and the princes, when they found it was to their prejudice that they had thus bound themselves, did not apply to Eleazar for a dispensation, much less did they pretend that no faith is to be kept with heretics, with Canaanites. No, they were strangers to the modern artifices of the Romish Church to elude the most sacred bonds, and even to sanctify perjuries. 2. Though the people were uneasy at it, and their discontent might have ended in a mutiny, yet the princes would not violate their engagement to the Gibeonites. We must never be overawed, either by majesty or multitude, to do a sinful thing, and go against our consciences. 3. Though they were drawn into this league by a while, and might have had a very plausible pretense to declare it null and void, yet they adhered to it. They might have pleaded that though those were the men with whom they exchanged the ratifications, yet these were not the cities intended in the league. They had promised to spare certain cities, without names, that were very far off, and upon the express consideration of their being so, but these were very near, and therefore not the cities that they covenanted with. And many learned men have thought that they were so grossly imposed upon by the Gibeonites that it would have been lawful for them to have recalled their promise, but to preserve their reputation, and to keep up in Israel a veneration of an oath, they would stand to it, but it is plain that they thought themselves indispensably obliged by it, and were apprehensive that the wrath of God would fall upon them if they broke it. And, however their adherence to it might be displeasing to the congregation, it is plain that it was acceptable to God, for when, in pursuance of this league, they undertook the protection of the Gibeonites, God gave them the most glorious victory that ever they had in all their wars, ch. 10, and long afterwards severely avenged the wrong Saul did to the Gibeonites in violation of this league. Let this convince us all how religiously we ought to perform our promises, and make good our bargains, and what conscience we ought to make of our words when they are once given. If a covenant obtained by so many lies and deceits might not be broken, shall we think to evade the obligation of those that have been made with all possible honesty and fairness? If the fraud of others will not justify or excuse our falsehood, Certainly the honesty of others in dealing with us will aggravate and condemn our dishonesty in dealing with them. Though they spared their lives, yet they seized their liberties, and sentenced them to be hewers of wood and drawers of water to the congregation, v. 21. By this proposal the discontented congregation was pacified, for those who were angry that the Gibeonites lived might be content when they saw them condemned to that which, in the general apprehension, is worse than death, perpetual servitude. Those who were angry that they were not spoiled might be content when their serving the congregation would be more to the public advantage than their best effects could be, and, in short, the Israelites would be not losers either in honor or profit by this peace with the Gibeonites. Convince them of this, and they will be satisfied. The matter is here settled between Joshua and the Gibeonites, and an explanation of the league agreed upon. We may suppose that now, not the messengers who were first sent, but the elders of Gibeon, and of the cities that were dependent upon it, were themselves present and treated with, that the matter might be fully compromised. Joshua reproves them for their fraud, v. 22. And they excuse it as well as they can, v. 24. Joshua gives the reproof very mildly, "Wherefore have you beguiled us?" He does not load them with any ill names, does not give them any harsh provoking language, does not call them, as they deserve to be called, base liars, but only asks them, "Why have you beguiled us?" Under the greatest provocations, it is our wisdom and duty to keep our temper, and to bridle our passion. A just cause needs not anger to defend it, and a bad one is made never the better by it. They make the best excuse for themselves, that the thing would bear, v. 24. They found by the word of God that sentence of death was passed upon them. The command was to destroy all the inhabitants of the land, without exception, and they found by the works of God already wrought that there was no opposing the execution of this sentence. They considered that God's sovereignty is incontestable, His justice inflexible, His power irresistible, and therefore resolved to try what His mercy was, and found it was not in vain to cast themselves upon it. They do not go about to justify their lie, but in effect beg pardon for it, pleading it was purely to save their lives that they did it, which every man that finds in himself the force of the law of self-preservation will therefore make great allowances for, especially in such a case as this, where the fear was not merely of the power of man. If that were all, one might flee from that to the divine protection, but of the power of God Himself, which they saw engaged against them. 2. Joshua condemns them to servitude, as a punishment of their fraud, v. 23, and they submit to the sentence, v. 25, and for aught that appears both sides are pleased.